A movie to me is the lenses. That's it. The lenses and then the lighting.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. We're going to talk about Sinners and hopefully ask some questions that Autumn hasn't been asked a million times. I like to think of myself as a horror buff. I love vampire movies. I have to say Sinners. I don't want to be a spoiler alert. Basically, what Autumn did as a cinematographer broke all the rules. This question bothered me for years. Why was it called grilled cheese as the working title? Was there kind of underlying meaning to that?
Yeah, no, Ryan, like, I think when you work in Marvel, you always have code names, or lots of movies have code names. So he was familiar with all of his stuff had code names. So that was its code name that he gave it, because the original conception that he had for the film was to be kind of a down and dirty shoot shot on 16 millimeter, and he was saying something like, it's something you can make really easily and fast, but tastes really good. But then it turned into 10-course meal, like Michelin thing, because it went IMAX and 5-perf. But the original concept was that, so that's why it's called grilled cheese, because that was his first intention, was to make something with his friends that would taste good, that was quick and fast.
Autumn has a really secret word that she applies to all her lenses, and this word is Steez. And for years, I've known Autumn, I was like, what is this Steez thing? And I don't know what Steez is. I looked in the Urban Dictionary. I have no idea.
Oh, I think I remember now. It wasn't, you're right, because I think it was with Loki. There was a very specific lens that I liked, and it was like, Dan, how'd you make this? You're like, I don't remember. It was just like there was one lens in the set that was gorgeous, and I gravitated towards it. And then I think when we did the next picture together, I was always asking for every lens to look like that a bit more.
Okay, so you definitely accomplished that. I think maybe after the success of The Last Showgirl, where you really pushed Steez to the limit, the original inception was that you thought grilled cheese or Sinners would have been shot on 16. And at what point did you find that it flipped, that you went to the biggest of the big and using ultra panatar anamorphic lenses and 15-perf IMAX to shoot this movie?
I've shot 16 before for like music videos and stuff. And I honestly, there are no lenses that exist that I like for 16. Probably because there's no anamorphics that I like for 16. And so it was like, if I'm going to shoot this format, because I knew Gia wanted to shoot it and I knew Ryan wanted to shoot it, and they were going to be back-to-back projects, we posed the question to you, and then, Mike was like, can we do this? Obviously it's a bigger question that had to happen because you made them. But it was like, can you make me a lens that I'll like, that has Steez, that is all the things that you think that I like, that we've been doing, for the past few years. Can you make that into a 16 lens? And I had the thought that, we'd do that for this film, and this film was much smaller, and it could have, trial and error within it, that we would be testing it for the next project as well, because I knew I'd be using it for both. And then it changed, we changed from 16 to 35 because we have all this twinning. And, the original VFX supervisor asked that there's more gate weave with 16, with the cameras and stuff. And so when you're doing all the twinning stuff and you have your lock-offs or however you decide to do your twinning shots, it becomes a problem for post. So we upped it to 35 for that reason, for the gate weave scenario. And then the studio called Ryan and said, have you guys thought about large format? And so after they called him, obviously we were shooting film, so large format meant like real IMAX and real, 65 5-perf. So he called me and he mentioned The Hateful Eight, and then he mentioned just like, let's talk about it, what can we do? And then I called Andrew Oren at Photochem, and I called Mike, and I was like, let's just get everything we can get, show me everything that you have. And we went to kind of town and started looking at stuff. We looked at a bunch of dailies of the tests you did with Robert, Richardson, the lens tests. They had those at Photochem, so Ryan and I watched those projected in their 70 room. So we watched that test. And yeah, it was a print, so it was very much like alive in the room. And, he stood up and he got very excited by it. So that's kind of how it happened. And then obviously it takes a lot more to make it happen with budget and logistics and studio. But I knew that after he saw that stuff and we did our test, he would fall in love, which I did too.
So there was quite a bit of convincing on the studio side to show them that this movie merited the largest of large formats.
Well, he does most of that talk. Like we, as director DP, were in the room looking at the tests. We went out to the desert. It was like me, Ryan, and Zinzi, his producer and partner. and my crew, very small crew. I found a really awesome stand-in, and we did a very intimate test with IMAX cameras, with your cameras, with C series. We shot some 35. We shot the 65, and we just did this test to look at it, to see if it worked, and we liked it. And then after he really felt like it was the best storytelling format, then he goes and talks to the studio, and then you have to do all the work to like make it work in the budget, obviously, and then make sure that the cameras are available, and that becomes another conversation. Are they available? Are all these things available? Can we afford these things? So yeah, I feel like he went and did that and obviously succeeded, but I wasn't in all of those talks, because those are
Right.
bigger talks that he has with them, because it's something it's really important to him.
Can you might explain to some of these young upcoming cinematographers of the challenges of having to be not just an artist, but also a political manager to survive in this industry?
Having this relationship with Panavision is great, and it allows us to tailor everything to like our creative side. Like we'll make lenses, we'll tune lenses, we'll pick the things that we want to pick, but it also means that it has some convincing that has to happen above me, depending on each project. So I think early on, when you find kind of the right tool for you, like when you decide like you have a love for anamorphic and you have a love for Steez or whatever it is in your arsenal, like it becomes a part of your style. So you're always, in an environment where you're trying to convince people of like, look, this is what I want to use. This is how I want to shoot it. This is how dark it wants to be. This is what stop I like to shoot at. You have to be confident in what you're trying to do and, execute that properly. But also you have to make sure everyone else feels comfortable with that. And so that kind of speaks to what you're saying is like, I think early on I found a love for, a certain way of shooting and, lighting and the lensing I like to do that, had a nice through line because I worked a lot with friends. So that's also a part of it is like I went to AFI and I developed, a group of friends and ended up, doing a lot of shooting with Gia, just trial and error and kind of figuring out what you like. And then you have certain pieces that you can show the world. Like, this is my style. This is what, I like to do. And that's all creative, and that allows for that. And then when you get your bigger films, like Loki or something like that, then it becomes more of a management. It's like 70% management and like 30% creative. So you've kind of flexed those creative skills with your friends, being artistic, running around, having trial and error. And then when the big job comes, you have to be ready to convince other people that it's that same style that you're trying to kind of infuse in like a bigger, more, larger budget, larger crew size, upper management kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I've always surrounded myself with good people and chosen things selectively, right? So that I could succeed in that environment, like worked with people that are going to support you wanting to take risks, you wanting to light things darker, you wanting to run around, with a wide open anamorphic lens and things falling in and out of focus or whatever it is like you just have to surround yourself with the right people, and that in turn will inform your style because that's the thing about being an artist is you have the choice. Like if you want to say yes or no, that is your choice. And if you say yes to something and then they don't let you light that way, they don't let you use your lenses, they don't let you use haze or whatever it is that they're telling you can't do, and your name's on it, then that becomes your style. That look that you didn't want to do, that you were forced into, becomes your style. So I try to pick wisely and put myself in environments where I can succeed, but also environments that I know that I'm going to be happy lighting and lensing in. And, meeting Ryan was, great because like Rachel obviously decided to direct, and she's a good friend, and so she knew that collaboration would go really well, and I would be in good hands.
What is one of your proudest shots that when they watch the movie that they want to be looking for that you think really transcends what you just spoke about of being true to who you are?
There's a sequence, without saying too much, it's upstairs, and it's Michael, or Smoke is a character, and Sammy, and they're talking upstairs, and it's just the two of them. It's very intimate. It's top lit. I remember when I shot it, it was like one of my favorite things, and it reminded me of Gordon Willis. Like it's one of those moments where it's very intimate scene where the actors are doing most of the work, but it's just photographed in the right way to serve the story. I remember after we shot that, I went up to Ryan and I said, "That's the one. That's the one."
Wow.
He knew I was very excited about that scene, and Michael was brilliant in that scene, and so was Sammy. It didn't, when we were shooting it, it felt like you were watching a movie, and that just means it's a good scene. if you feel like you're not rolling,
Right.
Yeah.
Up to this point, there's been this dogma with IMAX that you're using such a large negative that we usually keep the image as clean as possible. And Autumn asked for a IMAX lens with Steez, which kind of threw me off. And the motivation of how she pulled this lens still amazes me, so much so that it actually trickled down into the visual effects community. And Autumn actually pioneered the fact of having visual effects adopt this, to where before they would say that lens is too difficult, we can't use these lenses. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, it was on Panther. I had an amazing collaboration with our visual effects supervisor, Jeff Bauman, who did the first Panther with Ryan. And then he brought on Michael Ralla, who was our second unit visual effects supervisor. And fast forward, Michael Ralla ended up being our visual effects supervisor for Sinners. So I remember it was a day, I don't remember what it was, but some of you know in the room, visual effects supervisor is always going to be on set with you the whole time in prep as well. And they're going to ask you for things that are helpful to them to get their job done. Can you please shoot all your lenses, map all your lenses, chart them, do flare tests, or is it asking you to shoot extra plates for them, or whatever it is? There's a long list of things that some will ask you. And it was the first time, I think, I went up to him because I think he was there that day. Jeff was off doing something. And I asked him, I was like, well, why do you need this? Like, it was one thing he was asking me for, and I didn't agree with him. And I said, well, why do you need this? Like, what are you going to do with this? What's this for? And I think he said he didn't necessarily know an answer to give me at the time or something like that. And then I was like, well, why do you guys always make shit up? And I said that to him. I was like, why do you do that? Like, why are you, like, I'm here to, inform you, or whatever you need, I'm here. And it was such a great collaboration because he's super fun. Jeff's always super fun. We had a great environment on set, but it caused him to kind of answer that question and say, like, you're not wrong, because there was a lot of the time where VFX will make stuff up. And we know that, right? So we leave the job, we end principal photography. Then say you go on to another film. I don't do that. I stay on the film because I want to make sure it's okay. And then Ryan, involves me in post. But, you come back and then you look at, if you're just looking at the final cut, or say you come back and you look at some VFX reviews, and your whole background environment in the CG world looks completely different, doesn't have any of the Steez, or doesn't have any of the artifacts, doesn't have the correct flares, the lighting direction doesn't match. I mean, many, many things. And you're just like, I don't know why this happened. Like, we were on set, you saw how it was lit. We shoot balls and charts for everything. Why do you shoot balls and charts? So you can see the direction of the light, you can see how the lens reacts to it, you have a reference of that. And then now I'm getting this final composite, and it looks nothing like what I shot. So him and I talked for hours and hours about this stuff, and he ended up making a toolkit. And what he did was he made time to map and chart and do flare tests, and very, very extensive flare tests that he made boards for with very particular LED lights, and going well beyond what anyone's ever done for that. And he made a toolkit, and then he put everybody on the phone, every vendor on the phone, to have a conversation about the DP and how they like to light and what kind of lensing they light. And took the time to do this. And this time that takes to do these things costs money, right? So that's essentially, if you think about anything that you're ever going to ask for, it's going to translate to a cost. And whether or not the studio or someone that's in charge of line items wants to pay for that, right? Wants to take the time to have that paid for and really serve the story. And with Ryan, it's so important to him. His collaboration is so important with every department, and he allows people to exercise kind of their ideas and voice them in an open forum. And so it was important that, the lenses that we chose were matched when we did our VFX for Panther. So it started there with Panther. And then obviously with Sinners, that's a whole nother ballgame and a whole completely extensive thing where, we're scanning negative, and, they're doing a process in post that's never been done before because of our twinning and how we shot it. And, we did a lot of other stuff that I think not a lot of people know, is like we added cotton to the cotton fields and, stuff like that. So there's a lot of VFX in there that people don't see, but they don't see it because he did such a good job of making sure that the lensing matched in his post workflow. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's relationship. Like you have to force this relationship if it's important to you, because the moment that you relinquish what you've shot and you hand it over to somebody, if you don't give them a vision and you don't explain to them what you want, then if someone doesn't know, they're going to do what they want. I mean, it's as simple as that, really.
So considering that your career, like you talked with how you had the freedoms with some of your lower budgeted projects, or even with the Showgirl, where you had kind of this autonomy to really push the image quality to an edge. But at the same time, you negotiated these really high budgeted shows, like Loki, Sinners, obviously. Do you find that you have to play by a certain different discipline with those shows, that you have to be a little bit more careful of introducing it or slowly breaking in the whole studio into that look?
No, I mean, I think to put it simply, I think now talking about it, it's like if you have a vision, like Ryan, for instance, I'll use that as an example. Like if you're at a studio and someone hands you the script to Sinners and is like, I want to make this film. You have to believe in the filmmaker, right? Because it's a very original idea. He's an amazing filmmaker. And so, that's already something that's in someone's mind, but it's not been done before. It's a very unique script. So the person that's supporting that story, has to have a vision, and the person that's standing in front of them, asking them to take that risk. You want to believe. Everyone has to believe. And so I think as an artist, being able to convince people that like this is the way that the film should look. It should be underexposed. It should be lit like this. This is the lensing it should have. That has to come from you and your body of work and the belief that people around you have in you. And I think you have to prove that, right? You have to prove that with your past work. And if it's your first time proving it, you have to do a very good job at proving it. Like I think with Loki, that whole team did a very good job of building that world together, making very interesting sets that were never shot like that before in the Marvel universe. And so it's always a team effort. And I have an amazing team of, camera team, my lighting team, my grip team. They're all people I've worked with for over many years. And so they're all a part of you executing very well and keeping a consistent look, like being able to shoot a scene consistently and using those lenses the right way. Because you can, take any camera and lens system and you can also mess it up. You can have inconsistency and stuff. And so, it has to serve the story. Because at the end of the day, if you do a good job lighting and lensing and shooting a scene and it serves the story and it makes the story better, then that's always going to be a positive. So when given the opportunity, I think it's great to be brave and push the boundaries, but you have to know how to manage and use the tools properly if you're going to go and push like that. What was great about Sinners, I think, is that Ryan was so excited about making that movie. Like from the moment that he sent me the script, that he got the group together, every day he was so excited. Like I remember we'd be shooting something and the scene would end and he'd be like, I love this movie so much. And so, when you're around someone that's that inspiring and that excited, like it makes you that excited and inspired, and also makes you, want to test the boundaries and want to push the envelope and want to do new and exciting things. So I think the most important thing I can say is just like put yourself in environment, like you are enough, number one, like you are enough. Because I think a lot being, a minority or a woman in an environment that's mostly dominated by men is that, sometimes you think, well, I can't do that, or like I'm not supposed to do that, because yourself is not being reflected in the environment around you. But I will say, just being here and going through what I've been through is like you are enough, like you belong in the environment. But then also like just trust what's inside and like put yourself in environments that people like Orion or a Gia they really are interested in what you have to say, and it comes from here, right? Like, and then, just push the boundaries, but do your homework, because I think that's also important. Like I've been working with Panavision for a long time, with Rick, with Mike, with Dan, and it's so important to me because it's still a part of like my group of people that like right before I shoot, I'm talking to all these people about what I'm doing and they're helping me get to the right place. So yeah, build your teams wisely and just put yourself near inspiring people, because that really does infuse your own work for sure. Yeah.
With that, is there any questions for Autumn? Yes.
You seem to have a preference for lighting that makes the colors pop, plus like a preference for softer, maybe dreamier optics. I was wondering how you came to develop that look over your career.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the dreamy stuff I think starts with Gia and like us or in our earlier stuff. I remember, and Rick's here because he covered that film, but like we were shooting Palo Alto and we wanted it to look like The Outsiders. And that's C-Series, I believe. But we couldn't afford them, so I shot Panavision Super Speeds. But my intention was always like a softer, older vintage look, because that's what I always gravitated towards. And so it's funny because I think Palo Alto is like one of these examples of a very dreamy look. But I was always, I used filtration, and with Gia, we would always like beat up the image and make it look kind of, just pastel-y. And, that was kind of an affinity I had early on in all these fashion films that we would do. And then once I could get my hands on some anamorphics, like, yeah, I would ask for the oldest. And some people don't like all of those characteristics and, what some may call messiness or like inconsistencies in focals and sets. But I actually appreciate that. I like when things are messy and have character. And so, yeah, I feel like early on it was just doing a ton of fashion stuff. And Gia and I, that's the way we like things. And I mean, I always still have an affinity. If something's too sharp, Dan gets the lens sent back.
Yeah. You've gone from the smallest of small, 16 film, to the largest of the large, 15 perf IMAX. Are you have an affinity for all formats still, where it's appropriate, or do you find that you have a greater love for the larger formats now, or do you love the grittiness of the smaller, or it's per production?
Yeah, I mean, I was saying this earlier today. It's like, it's so cheesy. Because I think we had a phone call prior when I was in prep. And he said to me, he's like, I miss it when I'm not using it. And it's so true. Because, I'll text Ryan and I'll be on set, with a camera and, a digital camera. And I'll just be kind of depressed. To be honest. No offense, digital cameras. But, yeah, I mean, there's something that happens that you develop a relationship with it, and there's just so much care that's put into it, and a process that you enjoy, and it's like militant process. Your team is on their best game, and I miss that. I like that. Like, that's something that I think as a cinematographer I appreciate. Like, I appreciate the technical, I appreciate the process and the respect that is given to shooting that format, how everyone acts around that format, how it feels, and to be honest, I mean, it's shooting film in general. Like, it's really just a very personal relationship. Only I know what it's going to be exposed. So only I am exposing it, and only I can be fired, right? So, I mean, that's a big, important job, and I take it seriously. But also, it's like a very, really kind of small window that you live in on set when, everyone's set up everything, and you're kind of, the controller of the exposure and the, when it rolls through the camera and like what you think it's going to turn out like. You only know that in your head. And then it's given off to a lab, and then the lab, and it goes for all these hands that take care of it. You would be the first person, you're making the lenses, and then I'm like, oh, these look great. And so then on set, I'm very excited about the lenses. I start always with the lenses. That's my favorite thing to do. That's the first thing I start with. A movie to me is the lenses. That's it. The lenses and then the lighting. Like for a cinematographer, like those are the two things that I feel like can create that character for the director. So I like living in that moment of like exposure and not knowing, and you being the only one that has that kind of feeling. So I miss that when I'm shooting digital, because digital monitor, everyone's there, everyone's looking at it, everyone's picking it apart, giving you their opinions and stuff like that.
So you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie. Do you get that kind of high of nervousness of going into dailies of the unknown?
No, I don't. To be honest, I don't get nervous anymore, because I think when something's wrong, right? I have the best technicians in the world on this stuff, and we know what we're doing. So, if something happens, when something's wrong. Like, obviously, I'm nervous when an accident happens or there's a jam or something gets lost or something like that, which is completely natural. We were lucky enough to go to this little theater in New Orleans called the Britannia, and there's this one lens maker in Boston that makes the anamorphic lens to put on the 70 projector. Remember we talked about it?
Yeah.
Because to project it, you need that special lens. And so we got one shipped, studio shipped it down there, and I got to watch my hair and makeup dailies in the theater. And I think why it was special is because I know how they looked, because, we did tests, and I just, had shot the Last Showgirl before. So I would say that was a nice exercise to have before Sinners, because I got to exercise all of my, underexposure on that, even though it was 16 and not 15 perf. But I was sitting in the theater, and they played, and, some would have more of a green shift or more of a cooler shift, and it's just beautiful. So it's that stuff I think is fun to watch. Print, though. Print is like the best thing. I love watching prints. It's so pretty. Yeah.
It has such a kind of depth and volume to it.
Yeah, I mean, just the black level. I'm obsessed with the black level, so prints are the best way to watch that.
Is there any more questions?
When you push the lenses to the extreme, there's a sweet spot where they function better. Can you describe a little bit about what that sweet spot is, and is it limiting having to function within that specifically?
the value of knowing the glass that comes from this company and have only shot this glass for, to be honest, my whole career. You learn every bit of series, and you know, trial and error it, and you find which lensing you like the best, and then you know how to speak to that, right? You know, lighting is so important, and I'm not sure if people talk about that as much in relation to lensing, because it's not just about picking a lens. I always feel like you have to pick the right lens for how you like to light. In the trial and error and kind of the relationship I've built, I've just found like the kind of groove at which the lighting that I like to do, which is mostly top light, and you know, sometimes I'll use hard light as, you know, edge or something, and how the lenses perform. And I'll give him notes if something's amazing. To be honest, it's because of the lens. Like, the lighting looks better because of the lens.
Thank everyone for listening to our interview. I want to really thank Autumn for sharing some really enlightening words.
Thank you guys for whoever works here and is a part of making us be able to even shoot with these lenses and camera packages. Thank you.